Chapter 2. A Distant Lullaby. It was 5 days until Christmas, and in the snug attic bedroom high above the toy shop in Mistletoe Street, a boy called Oliver was tucked up in bed. His face was washed, his pyjamas were on, and the many blankets on his bed were pulled right up to his chin, but he was not asleep. A little torch was shining, and Oliver's nose was stuck in a book. He was reading aloud in his best reading voice to a very small mouse who was perched on his shoulder. The mouse had large ears, a long tail, and was wearing a smart little jumper. His name was Winston, and this was, he thought with a big happy sigh, his most and very favourite time of the day. The shop downstairs was closed for the night, all was calm and quiet, and the two best friends were nibbling biscuits and cosily catching up on their exciting adventure story. The book was terrifically thrilling, and Winston found himself holding his breath as he listened to Oliver reading. There were dramatic midnight dashes, a very curious mystery, and a whole cast of extraordinary characters. Oliver and Winston were hooked. Eventually, the chapter came to its cliffhanger end. Said Oliver, waggling his eyebrows. We could read the next chapter. The two friends looked at each other before Oliver made a decision. No, he said, we'll save it. It'll be more exciting that way. Winston nodded and watched as Oliver put the book on his bedside table. Then the boy settled himself down to sleep, tickling Winston's ears to say goodnight. Usually, Winston would snuggle up next to him until he fell asleep, but tonight he had something busy to do downstairs. So instead, he rubbed his tiny velvety nose against Oliver's, hugged his earlobe tightly, then clambered carefully off the bed and scampered towards the stairs. At the door, he turned round to check. His best friend was already fast asleep, and all Winston could see was a tumble of curly hair poking out above the blankets. Stifling a yawn himself, Winston hurried quickly downstairs. It had been a very long day, but then of course it was 5 days until Christmas, so the toy shop had been extremely busy indeed. How Winston had come to live in the toy shop had been an adventure and a half, which had taken place the previous Christmas. It had involved daring deeds, a lot of snow, and a midnight feast in a department store, and even flying and crashing in a toy aeroplane. But now all was safe and cosy. Winston had his enormous and lovely doll's house in the shop window in which to live, a human family who loved him, and a very busy and important job that he thoroughly enjoyed. Winston was the toy shop's very keen helper-outer, which meant he did all sorts of things that needed doing. Today he had scampered up to the highest shelves to fetch small toys. He had demonstrated the toy train that whizzed, puffing real steam, all around the shop, and he'd helped Oliver wrap up parcels by untangling the string. He had also spent much of the day supervising the post. This was his most favourite job. The shop sent lots of parcels all over the world, and so boxes were always whizzing out the door to faraway places. Winston checked them off the delivery list, and he even taught himself how to work the typewriter by jumping on the keys so that he could write the address labels himself. He also made sure that this year Oliver had written his letter to Father Christmas nice and early and had posted it properly. Winston's whole adventure the year before had started with a troublesome letter that had stubbornly refused to stay put inside the letterbox. Winston sighed happily. Yes, he thought, I'm a very contented little mouse. For a few minutes he gazed out the toy shop window while he waited for his friends Prue and Eduardo to arrive for their once-a-week late-night second dinner club. As Winston watched them, he felt a strange sensation suddenly wash over him. It was an empty sort of feeling, so he helped himself to one of those cheese biscuits he got out, ready for his friends to eat, and nibbled it thoughtfully. It was certainly very tasty, but after he finished it, he still felt oddly empty. He realised then that this feeling wasn't in his stomach, but in his chest, and it couldn't be fixed by eating something, no matter how delicious. This was something else entirely. The odd thing was that this wasn't the first time he'd felt this strange feeling. Recently, the sensation had come over him whenever he'd been watching the sort of scenes that were currently going on outside the shop. What did it mean, he wondered? Just then, the large clock above the clockmaker's shop opposite chimed the hour, and in the distance the cathedral bells began to ring. 9 bing-bongs for 9 o'clock. Then the bells began to chime a tune. Winston stood up and smoothed down his jumper so he'd look smart when his friends arrived. As he did so, he found himself humming along, despite the fact he didn't know the tune. Except he was surprised to discover he did know it. Suddenly, as he stood there in the window, something strange and magical happened to Winston. Whoosh! In his mind, he found himself hurtling backwards through his memories, past the busy events of the day, past yesterday, past last week, past the last month, past the last year. Back, he continued, back before Oliver, back before being a street mouse. Then, with a jolt, he stopped. In a strange, hazy world of his remembrance, he looked about. Everything was warmly lit and cosy, but it was also blurry, as if he was looking at it through the wobbles of a jelly. He could make out a flickering light, and his ears waggled at the sound of someone humming. It was a gentle tune that the cathedral bells were playing. But who was humming it? Winston tried to remember, but the memory was very foggy. He could just about make out a shape. It was very unclear, but he could definitely see it, or rather, he could feel it. It felt full of kindness and somehow familiar. He reached out to the figure, his heart drumming fast in his chest, and then whoosh! Winston found himself back on the steps of his doll's house, blinking. He didn't know quite what had happened, but he did know something. He knew that somewhere, out there in the big, wide world, there was someone very important to him, and he knew that they were lost. We'll find out what happens tomorrow in chapter 3.